The Orphean War. M41. A Necron Tomb Ship called the Dead Hand is burning through the void of the Amarah System, and Asterion Moloc is inside it. He has led a precision teleport strike into the command vault, Tartaros Pattern Terminator Armour, a design now 10,000 years old, a chapter master who shouldn't be standing where he is standing. He finds the Necron Overlord believed to be Kutlakh, war leader of the Maynarkh Dynasty, and he strikes it down. Then the engagement turns, the hull ruptures, and Asterion Moloc is blasted into open space. His fleet reports him killed in action. Then they recover him, alive. Per Imperial Armour, Volume 12, The Fall of Orpheus, this is at least the 7th such incident over the last 5 Terran centuries where the chapter master of the Minotaurs is thought to have been killed only to later reappear. 7 documented deaths, 500 years, 1 name, 1 set of armor now 10,000 years old, 1 chapter whose administrative records are sealed under authority that even the Inquisition can't circumvent. The official observers file this under Minotaur's chapter insularity and extensive cybernetic modification and close the dossier. The dossier shouldn't close, not when you read what the full record actually contains. There is one hypothesis that resolves every anomaly simultaneously. The Thunder Warrior hypothesis. This isn't a Games Workshop confirmation. Games Workshop has left this deliberately ambiguous, and that ambiguity is a creative choice they are entitled to maintain. What this is, instead, is the strongest available read of the documented evidence, built from named primary sources, presented in order of evidentiary weight, with its counter-arguments named before the audience raises them. Asterion Moloc is a Thunder Warrior. The Minotaur's chapter is the institutional shell constructed to conceal him. The Imperium has been running that operation for 10,000 years. Begin with the foundation. In the late 29th millennium, before the first Astartes ever existed, the Emperor began his conquest of Terra. The tool he used was the Legiones Caetigas, 20 regiments of genetically engineered superhuman soldiers, referred to in ancient records as the Thunder Warriors. Per the Warhammer 40,000 fandom wiki, drawing from canon, they were created from adult male warriors through alchemical augmentation, somatic gene sculpting, and muscle grafting techniques. Not from adolescents as Space Marines would later be. Adult men, physically transformed, organized into 20 legions, each focused on a specific tactical specialty. They were more powerful in direct combat than the Astartes who followed them. Per the fandom wiki, even severely deteriorated Thunder Warriors were capable of fighting multiple Astartes at once. During the Cerberus insurrection in the early Great Crusade, years after the Unification Wars had formally concluded, a small surviving band calling themselves the Daitar participated in a rebellion against the nascent Imperium. The Emperor sent the 12th Legion, the Warhounds, to suppress them. Those Thunder Warriors had been in physical decline for decades. They were still sufficiently lethal that they managed to slaughter 4 to 5 times their number of Astartes before the insurrection was put down, per the fandom wiki. The problem was biological. Thunder Warriors were created in a hurry, from adult men, using techniques the Emperor's geneticists were still refining. Their genetic template was unstable. Some suffered catastrophic metabolic failure unpredictably. Others experienced mental deterioration, dangerous mental instability, and early metabolic collapse when their bodies began to reject their augmentations, as the fandom wiki frames it. The degradation timeline varies across sources, ranging from years to decades, but the direction was always the same. They were built to conquer Terra. They weren't built to last. The Emperor chose not to replace their losses as the unification wars wound down. Then he chose more active measures. The Imperial Chronicle holds that the last Thunder Warriors died heroically at the Battle of Mount Ararat in 669, M30, the final engagement of the Unification Wars. Auric Tyrannus, the most celebrated among them, known as the Lightning Bearer, raised the banner of lightning at the final declaration of unity and died of his wounds. A heroic last stand, a clean ending. Per the fandom wiki, drawing from the established canon across multiple Black Library sources, this heroic version of events was completely false. The Thunder Warriors had not died in battle. They had been brutally culled from existence by the Emperor's own servants on his orders. The primary cull was carried out by the Custodian Guard, believed to have been led by Constantine Valdor himself, supported by several thousand prototype Astartes of the Eye Legion. The Custodes against the Thunder Warriors, the only soldiers in the Imperial armies then considered capable of defeating the Thunder Legions. Some survived. The fandom wiki is explicit on this point. Though some Thunder Warriors successfully escaped the call, however it happened, the vast majority of those who survived the Unification Wars died at the hands of their own allies. Bands continued to exist in hiding. Some escaped off-world. These were later hunted down and destroyed by the First Legion, the future Dark Angels. The most significant confirmed survivor is Auric Tyrannus, known as the Throne Slayer, Victor of Gadoir, the Last Rider, the Butcher of Scandia. He is documented alive in The Outcast Dead by Graham McNeill in the Horus Heresy period, over a century after his supposed death. Per Lexicanum, he eventually used techniques drawn from Astartes biology to address the genetic instability of the Thunder Warriors, solving the degradation problem, though not before suffering considerable degeneration himself. His ultimate fate in current canon is unresolved. He has never been confirmed dead. The in-universe official record has him dead at Mount Ararat. That record has already been established in the same sources as deliberate falsification. This is the structural gap the Thunder Warrior hypothesis requires. The purge was real. The culling was systematic, but it wasn't complete. At least one Thunder Warrior survived into the Heresy period, solved the biological degradation problem using Astartes science, and then disappeared from the record. The Imperium's official history does not record where Tyrannus went. The Imperium had no institutional interest in recording it. Now, read the Moolok file. Asterion Moloc, satrap of the Daedalus Crata, bringer of wrath, the brazen warlord, spear of judgment, master of the Minotaurs. Per Imperial Armour Volume 10, The Badab War, he is a veteran of hundreds of battles. His body has been heavily rebuilt with cybernetic augments, and his sheer spite and malice are enough to allow him to shrug off wounds that would fell a lesser space marine. Outside of battle, per Lexicanum, he sits on his brazen throne, at the center of the maze-like chambers of the heavy assault carrier Daedalus Crata, surrounded by data feeds, tabulation servitors, and casualty reports, measuring the drops of blood spilt in quest of his chapter's strategic goals. No homeworld, no fortress monastery. He commands from a warship, perpetually in motion. Take the anomalies in order, from the weakest to the strongest. First, the 5-century service span. This is the most cited anomaly and the most easily dismissed in isolation. 7 documented deaths and revivals across 500 years, per Imperial Armour Volume 12. Lord Commander Dante of the Blood Angels has served for approximately 15 centuries, so longevity alone doesn't establish the case. What the service span establishes is the minimum age floor. Moolok has been operationally active for at least 5 centuries. That is the baseline. The anomaly emerges when the other items are added. Second, the Tartaros armor. Per Imperial Armour Volume 12, the Tartaros Pattern Terminator Armour is a relic design among its kind, developed in the latter stages of the Great Crusade in the late 30th millennium. Approximately 10,000 years before M41, relic armor exists in M41. Other chapters maintain ancient equipment. Its presence on Moolok isn't impossible as a standalone fact. Combined with the next item, it becomes considerably harder to dismiss. Third, the Black Spear. Per Imperial Armour Volume 12, the Black Spear is an ancient artifact, steeped in blood, and said to have once been used by the Legio Custodes, a truly deadly relic weapon of unknown provenance. The Lexicanum notes it's similar in some regards to weapons of the Adeptus Custodes, a weapon from the custodian arsenal, unknown provenance, no acquisition record. The Custodes don't issue weapons to Astartes. They don't donate relics to Space Marine chapters. The only beings with documented operational proximity to custodian equipment prior to the Great Crusade were the Thunder Warriors, who fought alongside the Legio Custodes during the Unification Wars. A Thunder Warrior who survived the Purge and subsequently received institutional sponsorship from the Emperor's inner circle would be precisely the kind of figure who might retain a weapon from that period. The provenance being listed as unknown isn't incidental. Someone removed that record. Fourth, the custodian reaction. In Watchers of the Throne, The Regent's Shadow by Guy Haley, a custodian narrator records their assessment of Asterion Moloc in direct terms. He exuded the most powerful stench of violence I had ever been in the presence of. A custodian guard, an individual created in the same era as the Thunder Warriors, someone who has stood in the presence of Primarchs, who has lived through 10,000 years of the Imperium's wars, who has fought beside the Emperor himself. For such a being to describe a Space Marine chapter master as the most violently intense presence they had ever encountered, that reaction isn't a comment on Molok's reputation. The Custodes aren't impressed by reputations. That reads as recognition. Fifth, the M38 disappearance. The Minotaur's chapter vanished entirely in M38. The records don't explain why. They returned in M41, described as being in a very different form. Asterion Moloc served as chapter master before the disappearance and remained chapter master after the return. The gap between M38 and M41 spanned somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 years. During that time, the chapter does not officially exist. Moolok apparently continued to. No single anomaly proves the thesis. The 5-century service span is unusual but not definitively impossible for a standard Astartes. The Tartaros armor is ancient equipment, not biological evidence. The Black Spear is a curiosity without its acquisition record. The custodian's reaction is one line in one novel. The M38 gap is documented but unexplained. What matters is that no single alternative explanation resolves all 5 of these simultaneously without generating its own set of irresolvable questions. The Thunder Warrior hypothesis does. Now the chapter itself. The Minotaurs are fleet-based. Per the 1D6 Chan and fandom wiki accounts drawing from Imperial Armour, they have been fleet-based since their founding, not as a consequence of the Badab War, but as original design. They have no named homeworld. Their founding date is listed in the 1D6 Chan entry as 21st founding, supposedly, and that qualification matters. The 21st founding is the cursed founding, associated with genocide instability. The attribution is uncertain even as presented. Their genocide is compromised. Per the fandom wiki, drawing from Imperial Armour, the Minotaurs entered the Badab War partly because their genocide was in crisis. So began a desperate quest for survival, a crusade across the stars to reach Terra and access purified gene seed reserves before the chapter wastes away. They supplement their own failing stocks by taking genocide from defeated enemies. Their progenitor legion is irresolvable across sources. Iron Warriors, World Eaters, Unknown, and Chimeric all appear depending on which source is consulted. The 1D6 Chan entry notes that hints exist suggesting one of the two identities associated with the Minotaur's name used chimeric genocide. No canonical source confirms who their biological progenitor actually was. Their administrative records are sealed. Per the Scribd-hosted fandom wiki excerpt drawing from Imperial Armour, the Minotaur's origins and history have been deliberately suppressed and sealed under binding edicts laid down by the High Lords of Terra that even the authority of the Inquisition can't circumvent. Other Space Marine chapters have records. The Minotaurs have edicts preventing access to records that are themselves classified. Per Lexicanum, citing Imperial Armour Volume 10 directly, the Minotaurs chapter have been used often in the past to prosecute traitors, iconoclasts, and renegades from within the ranks of the Space Marines by the High Lords of Terra. The High Lords specifically, not the Inquisition, not the Adeptus Terra's broader bureaucracy, not the chapter's own judgment, the High Lords of Terra as a governing body. During M42, after Guilliman's return, the Minotaurs sided with the Hexarchy against the returned Primarch. When the coup collapsed and the new master of the Administratum whispered something to Asterion Moloc that no one else present could hear, the entire chapter stood down and departed Terra without explanation. Per the Lexicanum account, Moolok had been moments away from facing a Custodian shield captain in single combat, making the Custodian feel as close to afraid as a Custodes could possibly be, and stopped at a word from a civilian administrator. A Space Marine chapter that answers only to the High Lords, that has fought against other Space Marine chapters at their direct order, that withdrew from open combat on a single, inaudible instruction from a political official. This isn't how autonomous Astartes chapters behave. The Codex Astartes was designed specifically to prevent any single authority controlling large numbers of Space Marines. The Minotaurs have effectively negated that safeguard by institutional design. They are the deliberate exception. One additional detail from the 1D6 Chan and fandom wiki sources. Imperial observers have documented the Minotaur's ability to rebuild from severe casualties in a fraction of the time normal chapters require. The standard Space Marine replenishment cycle involves years of neophyte training and genocide maturation. The Minotaurs apparently operate on a different timeline. The explanation offered by Imperial scholars, hypnotherapy and neurocerebral conditioning, addresses the psychological formation of recruits, but not the biological timeline. The institutional cover hypothesis suggests a different reading, a chapter whose primary function is maintaining and protecting one entity, has access to resources, personnel, and authorizations unavailable to any chapter whose purpose is purely military. The counter-arguments deserve their full presentation. This is where the hypothesis earns its credibility or forfeits it, and the strongest challenge should be stated at its strongest. The most robust alternative explanation is the one that Imperial armor itself raises. Per the fandom wiki, drawing from that primary source, some Imperial observers have advanced the rather extreme supposition that Asterion Moloc hasn't been one space marine but many down the centuries, each inheriting not only a name and panoply, but also, and somewhat blasphemously, an ingrammatically enforced personality and recorded memories taken from many different lifetimes. Multiple Molochs. Each death is a genuine death, a different individual inheriting the persona and the equipment. This explanation resolves the longevity and revival anomalies without requiring Thunder Warrior biology. The Tartaros armor is a chapter heirloom. The Black Spear is passed down. The 5-century service span is a succession of chapter masters sharing a name. The problem is structural. A program of ingrammatic memory imprinting and enforced personality inheritance describes forbidden technology, the kind that gets chapters investigated and potentially destroyed by the Inquisition. The secret it substitutes for the Thunder Warrior hypothesis is, if anything, more politically explosive and no less in need of the same sealed records and High Lord's protection. It also doesn't explain the M38 disappearance. It doesn't resolve why the founding records are sealed at the highest level rather than simply being lost. It doesn't account for the custodian's specific reaction, which is a response to biological presence rather than to a constructed reputation. And it requires the same institutional machinery as the Thunder Warrior hypothesis without providing a simpler explanation for why that machinery was built in the first place. The cybernetics explanation is the official in-canon account. Moloc's body has undergone, per the fandom wiki, extremely high-level cybernetic surgery. Dark Age of technology augmentation is genuinely powerful, and its limits in the 41st millennium are deliberately vague. But cybernetics that allow recovery from 7 incidents described as kills in action over 5 centuries, combined with a 30th millennium armor pattern still in operational use, and a custodian-adjacent weapon with no acquisition record. These anomalies are accumulating past what standard cybernetics can cleanly absorb. Standard Astartes longevity, plausible for some anomalies, insufficient for the complete picture. A space marine with exceptional longevity wearing relic armor and carrying an ancient weapon is unusual but not impossible. Add the sealed records, the High Lord's command chain, the irresolvable genocide progenitor, and the millennia-long disappearance, and the longevity explanation is carrying more weight than it was designed to hold. The biological degradation challenge is the sharpest technical objection to the Thunder Warrior hypothesis. Multiple sources describe a degradation process that was both real and variable in timeline. Some accounts describe rapid failure. Others suggest decades of continuing function. The Lexiconum, drawing from The Outcast Dead, confirms that Eric Tyrannus solved the instability problem using Astartes biology. The solution exists in canon. A Thunder Warrior maintained by the Emperor's own institutional apparatus, resourced, medically supported, given access to the finest genocide and biological expertise the Imperium possessed, wouldn't be working from the same baseline as a fugitive warrior hiding in a gladiator pit under a ruined palace. That doesn't confirm Moloch solved the problem. It establishes that the problem has a canonical solution, and that the entity best positioned to implement that solution was the Imperium itself. Tartaros the Red Wake warrants a stop, though the evidentiary coverage is thinner than the Moolok case. The Carcharodon's Reaper Lord of the Void is the second figure the broader community conversation keeps arriving at. Games Workshop's own official documentation lists the Carcharodon's Primarch as unknown. Per Imperial armor, they appeared at the Badab War unexpectedly, emerging from void space without prior contact or formal deployment orders. Ordo Illuminati's treatment of the Tartaros case has achieved significant viewership in the 40K lore community, positioning him as a surviving figure from a pre-standard era. The community response to that video demonstrates both the appetite for this category of theory and the rigor with which the audience will contest it. The highest liked rebuttal on that video directly challenged the evidentiary standard of the claim. The Moolok case and the Tartaros case are structurally similar but evidentially distinct. The Tartaros argument rests primarily on physical scale anomalies and narrative mystery. The Moolok argument rests on administrative irregularities and documentary evidence. They share the same structural signature, an entity whose documented features are inconsistent with standard Astartes history, operating within an institutional structure that does not behave like normal Space Marine administration. But the evidence types differ. Tartaros is the dramatic case. Moolok is the administrative case. Both cases are what the community comment sections have been assembling for years. Multiple threads on multiple platforms have named Asterion Moloc alongside Tartaros as candidates for the same reading. The audience has been half making this argument in comment sections on competing videos. This treatment makes it formally and with the evidence laid out. 10,000 years. The Imperium has maintained the Mount Ararat account for 10,000 years. The official record holds that the Thunder Warriors died heroically in the last battle of the Unification Wars. The actual record, accessible at the highest levels, holds that they were massacred on the Emperor's orders by his own guards. Per the fandom wiki, drawing from the established canon, the Thunder Warriors had not died to a man during the final battle of the Unification Wars. They had been brutally culled from existence. The Imperium has been suppressing this information since before the Horus Heresy. Its institutional habit at this point, not a special operation. The mythology cost of admitting a surviving Thunder Warrior isn't primarily about the Thunder Warriors themselves. It's about what their survival implies. The Space Marines are the Imperium's foundational mythology of the post-Crusade period. Their creation is presented as the Emperor's perfection. Warriors built for stability where the Thunder Warriors weren't, for discipline where the Thunder Warriors weren't, for a galaxy-spanning campaign rather than a continental one. They are the lasting achievement. A surviving Thunder Warrior does not disprove their value. It demonstrates that the gap between the old program and the new one wasn't as clean as 10 millennia of Imperial record insist. The Emperor ordered the Purge. The Purge was incomplete. Either he failed to complete it, which raises questions the Imperium's established theology can't comfortably process, or he deliberately preserved some. The second reading is the one the Moolok hypothesis suggests. A Thunder Warrior whose value as a controlled asset exceeded the political cost of his survival, given the right institutional packaging. Neither reading is suitable for public record. The Inquisition exists to manage exactly this category of threat, not to find truth, but to determine what truths the Imperium can survive knowing. The High Lords of Terra maintain the authority to issue exactly the kind of binding edict that locks down a chapter's founding records, seals its genocide archives, and instructs the Inquisition itself that certain files don't exist. The Minotaurs aren't an anomaly within that system. They are the system functioning as designed.
The sealing of those records under the highest possible authority, inaccessible even to the Inquisition, per the fandom wiki, drawing from the Imperial Armour primary sources, isn't suspicious behavior from an organization with something to hide. It's standard operating procedure for an Imperium that has been managing this specific category of institutional secret since 669 M30. Here is what the evidence supports, stated at the certainty level the evidence warrants. Asterion Moloc has been operationally documented across at least 5 centuries, with 7 recorded death and revival incidents. His armor is a relic design developed in the latter stages of the Great Crusade. His primary weapon is documented as of unknown provenance with custodian-adjacent construction. His chapter's administrative records are sealed under authority that supersedes the Inquisition. Their genocide progenitor is irresolvable. Their founding date is uncertain. They respond to the High Lords of Terra and no other recognized authority. A custodian guard described Moolok as the most violently intense presence they had ever encountered. His chapter disappeared for millennia and returned under his continued command. The in-canon alternative explanations, cybernetics, multiple Mooloks, standard longevity, each resolve some of these anomalies and leave others without clean answers. The Thunder Warrior hypothesis resolves all of them under a single institutional framework. It requires that one Thunder Warrior survived the Purge, was recognized as a usable asset by whatever authority made that determination, and was given a chapter as operational cover. A chapter whose entire structure exists to prevent anyone from successfully asking what sits at its center. Games Workshop hasn't confirmed this. They have left it ambiguous, and they are entitled to. What they have written is a character whose every documented feature is consistent with this reading, and whose features aren't simultaneously consistent with any other single explanation. The Thunder Warrior Purge left a documented gap. Aric Tyrannus confirmed the gap was real and survivable. The Minotaur's chapter is the evidence that someone, at some point, made a deliberate decision about what to do with what fell through it. 2 cases, 2 different evidence types, the same structural signature. If Moolok is one, and the Tartaros evidence points toward a second, the question isn't whether the Inquisition is running parallel operations. The question is how many parallel operations there are and how long they have been running. Drop your candidate for the third below. The audience always finds them first. Subscribe for more stories like this.